I hadn't seen the Stonebridge sign in 8 years. Still crooked, still half-lit, still pretending this place was untouched by time. But I knew better. Time had done exactly what it always does. It buried things. Sometimes bodies. Sometimes the truth. The radio was still playing the local station when I pulled off the main road. Static hissed between each headline. 3 university students still missing after last week's tour of the Lyra Institute. I turned the volume down, but not before catching the last word classified. They always use that when something's already too far gone. I parked near the edge of town, just out of sight. It was early morning, that in-between silence before people start pretending they're okay. Fog clung low over the rooftops like a secret trying not to be noticed. I stepped out and felt it immediately. The weight. Not just the damp air, or the smell of old rain and diesel, but the way Stonebridge looked at me. Or didn't. A woman at the bakery window paused, mid-wipe eyes narrowing before she turned away. A man with a dog on Main Street stopped walking, adjusted his collar, kept moving like I didn't exist. That was the thing about coming home. The silence was louder here. Familiar, sharp, and deliberate. They hadn't forgotten. In their minds, I was still the one who left, the one who cracked during the mission. The sister who let Marcus die. The church bell struck once as I passed the old stone wall, and I remembered the sound of it on the day of the funeral, muted by rain, by whispers, by the look on my mother's face when she wouldn't meet my eyes. I told them what really happened. No one wanted to hear it. Now 3 students were missing. Disappeared after a tech internship. No ransom, no footprints, no follow-up. And the last place they were seen, the Lyra Institute, a facility buried beneath the hill just outside town limits. Funny thing about that place, it didn't exist on maps until 4 years ago. Didn't even have a website. But somehow it had funding, government seals, rotating security, and a locked lab built inside the stone belly of the town. I lit a cigarette I didn't want, just to give my hands something to do. This wasn't just about 3 students. Something in me knew that before I even turned the car around, Stonebridge had always been a quiet town, too quiet. Now I wondered if the quiet wasn't peace, but erasure, and maybe I hadn't come home at all. Maybe I'd just walked into the place where memory goes to die. The envelope was already on my motel nightstand when I got back. No knock, no footsteps. Just there, waiting like it had been breathing quietly all day. No return address, no markings, just my name. Handwritten, not in cursive and block letters like someone didn't want their handwriting recognized. Or maybe, like someone was trained not to leave traces. I shut the door behind me, bolted it out of habit, then sat. The paper inside smelled like machine oil and dust. Folded once creased with military precision. There was only one thing on it, a grid of numbers, rows and columns, no explanation, no signature. But I knew it wasn't random, because right there in the bottom right corner were 2 dots. One red, one blue. Red for Alpha, blue for Omega. The way Marcus and I used to mark our cipher drills. Back when he still believed in teaching me things the boys in MI6 said I was too reckless to understand. Back when we trusted each other. My fingers tightened around the paper. I hadn't seen that cipher style since training. Not in the field. Not even in the agency's archive. It wasn't standard. It was ours. And Marcus was dead. Buried in a closed casket. Body never recovered. Unless he wasn't. I stayed up the rest of the night decoding the sequence, pacing between the windows, counting keystrokes under my breath like prayer beads. After 2 hours and 1 snapped pencil, the grid unraveled. Coordinates. Latitude, longitude just north of the old reservoir, and a second line of text barely visible in the lamplight. Printed in faded ink as if time itself had tried to erase it. Lyra is not a constellation. It's a command. I stared at the sentence until it stopped making sense. Then I pulled on my boots and grabbed the Beretta from the lockbox under the sink. The reservoir had been shut down a decade ago. Fencing still stood, but rusted and sagging like no one truly cared. I parked outside the tree line and made the rest of the way on foot. Wind pushed against the treetops, but underneath it all, Stonebridge was silent. almost too silent. The path ended in a clearing just wide enough for a helipad or a small convoy. The ground beneath me had been disturbed recently. Tire tracks' heavy pressure points. Not vehicles. Equipment. And then I saw it. Half buried in the slope was a door, steel reinforced. No signage, just a keypad and a single red sensor. Dead to any civilian. But I wasn't just a civilian. I still remembered what the old MI6 doors sounded like when you stood close enough. That faint electric hum behind metal, the ones you could hear only if you'd spent enough nights waiting in the dark, hoping it would unlock. I pressed my ear to the cold frame. Same hum. This wasn't abandoned. This was shielded. I didn't have access, not yet. But I didn't need it to see what this was. They'd built something down there. Something that needed to be hidden, insulated, protected. And if the note was right, its name was Lyra. The name buzzed in my skull all the way back to town. Lyra. Not a star. Not anymore. A command. I broke into the town's planning office the next morning. The receptionist still remembered me not fondly, but she didn't argue when I said I needed the records for the Lower Reservoir Reinforcement Project. There was no such project, but there were blueprints filed under Stonebridge Energy Optimization Initiative. Meaningless title. Dated 4 years ago, same time the Lyra Institute was established. When I opened the digital plans, I nearly laughed. The structure wasn't energy-related. It was a data vault, layered with biosecure access points, thermal shielding, and an inner chamber marked cognitive sync field. It hit me in the gut like a name spoken too late. This wasn't just an AI lab. It was neuromodulation tech, the kind I'd seen whispered about in deep agency reports. AI systems trained not to process data, but to overwrite human memory. Test subjects, memory implants, erasure protocols. God, the missing students, the blackouts in town, the gaps in people's timelines they couldn't explain. It wasn't paranoia. It was Lyra. And whoever sent that letter, they knew I'd come. They wanted me to find this. Not just for justice, but because someone else was about to forget what mattered most. And this time they might forget forever. The Lyra Institute looked exactly like it was designed not to draw attention. Glass and concrete tucked into the North Ridge, wrapped in government neutrality. Beige tones, polite signage, and the kind of landscaping that says we have nothing to hide. It might have fooled someone driving by, but I knew sterilized architecture when I saw it. You don't build like that, unless you're trying to bury something dangerous under a smile. The public entrance was closed for renovation. A paper sign duct taped to the front. Sloppy. Almost like they didn't expect anyone to care. I didn't try the front door. 3 miles west of the main building, hidden behind an overgrown chain-link fence, was a secondary access road. No camera, no guard booth. Just tire tracks that disappeared into a loading tunnel bored into the earth. Industrial lighting ran the length of it, dim flickering every fifth panel. Not abandoned, just neglected. That's where I broke in. It took me 16 minutes to bypass the exterior lock. 7 more to loop the live security feed on a maintenance server that hadn't been patched in 2 years. I was inside by 2:43 a.m. No alarms. No voices. Only the quiet hum of machines that don't need rest. The corridor was colder than I expected. The kind of cold that only lives where metal outweighs conscience. I moved fast, silent, every step a calculated risk. The deeper I went, the more the building stopped pretending to be an institute. No more inspirational posters about innovation or human potential. Just brushed steel doors, biometric locks, and glass panels looking in on nothing. Or so I thought. Behind one, I saw it. A room filled with stacked server racks and a single leather chair bolted to the floor. Restraint clasps dangling from its arms like forgotten shackles. The file room was 3 doors down. I found it because someone forgot to lock it. Inside, I pulled everything digital I could access. Downloads routed through a blacked-out laptop data, redirected through an encrypted relay I'd written years ago in Syria. The documents weren't labeled Project Lyra. They were called subject maps. each file tagged with time codes, EEG scans, neural latency charts. But it was the descriptions that stopped my breath cold. Subject 004, temporal disruption observed. Memory loop artificially terminated. Subject reports emotional detachment from daughter figure. Subject 007, facial recall failure. Unable to identify known associate from test group. Classified as acceptable margin of deviation. They weren't collecting memories. They were erasing them. I kept scrolling. Each page worse than the last. Words like behavioral reset compliance induction. Baseline overwrite. Language buried under technical jargon, but I knew exactly what I was looking at. They were running memory alteration trials. Not on volunteers, on people. Ordinary residents. Stonebridge wasn't the location. It was the lab. When I stepped out into town that morning, the sun was just starting to claw its way over the horizon. Light hit the buildings like nothing had happened, like Stonebridge was still whole. But the fractures were everywhere. I saw it at the market first. Mrs. Avery. She used to run the antique shop near the chapel. She was buying milk, same as she always had, same time every week. But when I said hi, she just blinked. "Do I know you?" she asked. Not cruelly, just blank. "It's Evelyn." Shaw. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she said slowly, like trying to fit a puzzle piece that no longer belonged. "That's nice." The next was Mr. Doran, the high school history teacher. He stood in front of the war memorial, muttering under his breath. He didn't recognize his own handwriting on the dedication plaque. And then there was the girl I don't even know her name. Maybe 15, standing outside the pharmacy holding a notepad. She flipped through pages like she was trying to remember why she wrote them in the first place. I forget sometimes. She said eyes not meeting mine. Little things like my mom's laugh. Or where I put the keys. But it's worse lately. Like I was awake, and then I wasn't. That's when I realized they weren't hiding the symptoms. They couldn't. Whatever Project Lyra was doing, it was breaking containment. People were unraveling. Not all at once. Not loudly, but enough to notice, enough to feel it in the air. Memory isn't just information, it's identity. Take it, and people don't just forget. They lose themselves. And still no one was talking. No protests, no lawsuits, no one filing complaints with the NHS or the council. Because how do you report a crime when you can't remember it happened? Back in my motel, I loaded the data I'd pulled onto a clean drive and stared at the download bar as it crawled toward 100%. My hands were shaking. I hadn't noticed until I dropped the cable trying to eject the disk. Marcus had warned me once back when he was still alive, still my brother. He said the most dangerous thing about power isn't how it's used. It's how quietly it slips into the places no one watches. Stonebridge wasn't asleep. It was being rewritten. And if I didn't stop it now, if I didn't pull this thing up by the roots, then one day I'd wake up in a town that looked just like Stonebridge, but no one would remember who I was. And worse, neither would I. I never intended to go back inside the Lyra Institute. I'd already stolen data, seen enough to know they were rewriting memories like lines of corrupted code. But it wasn't enough. Proof means nothing in a place like Stonebridge, unless you drag it breathing and ugly into the daylight. I returned through the same maintenance tunnel, but this time I followed a different corridor, one I'd marked on a blueprint I'd memorized in the planning office. A section marked D7 inactive. It wasn't. The keypad outside the door was newer than the others. No wear, no scratches, no dust. I clipped a bypass tool to the wiring and waited. It pulsed twice red, then green. The door hissed open. The air inside was different. Warmer, drier. Not like a lab. Like a vault. No lights. Just the steady blink of indicators from dozens of sealed pods, each one wired humming softly with a faint pulse behind the glass. Like something sleeping. I moved closer. Inside the first pod was a woman mid-40s, maybe younger. Expression slack. Electrodes webbed over her scalp. Her chest rose in a measured rhythm. She was alive. But whatever made her herself wasn't. I checked the panel below her. Subject ID L024. Cognitive sync status stable. Memory, uplink active. Destination node, LIRA core, archive, hub 1. I stepped back, stomach lurching. They weren't just wiping memory, they were harvesting it. Copying consciousness, threading identity into code, uploading lives like playlists. I ran a search across the console hands, shaking breath clipped short. A full directory popped up. L002 Benjamin Doran, L006 Avery Callum, L010 unnamed Emil high synaptic receptivity. L019 Marcus Shaw. I stopped breathing. I blinked. Once. Twice. The name didn't disappear. Marcus. My brother. Dead 8 years ago in a training op gone wrong. No body. No ceremony. No closure. He was here. File status. Live entry. Direct interface active. I scrolled deeper into the metadata. No physical specimen listed. Only digital reference. Which meant either Marcus had been turned into data, or someone was using his mind to train the system. And that thought, that someone had sliced my brother into segments and fed him to a machine. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't scream. I accessed the memory node list. Dozens of entries. Labeled by subject time-stamped. Categorized by emotion. Fear. Loss. Loyalty, rage. The last one, T148 Shaw Marcus. Protocol override, authority rejection. I downloaded everything. Dragged the data onto my drive, like I was lifting bodies from a battlefield. The entire room buzzed louder the deeper I pulled. Like the system knew. Like it was watching me watch it. And then I heard it a sound so soft it felt imagined. Breathing. Not mechanical. Human. I turned. At the far end of the room, one of the pods wasn't sealed. Its glass stood open, condensation trailing down the interior. Inside, limp and barely moving, was a boy. Early 20s. Pale. Thin. One I recognized from the missing persons report. Oliver Miles, student at Easton Tech. Vanished 4 weeks ago. His eyes twitched beneath the lids. He wasn't unconscious. He was stuck. Somewhere between download and erasure. I stepped toward him. His lips moved. Just one word. Help. My chest cracked. It was barely more than a whisper, but it was real. A voice that hadn't been deleted. Not yet. The console beside him displayed a countdown. 0:05:32. Final sync. I ripped the cables free. Everyone. Sparks spat from the ports, but I didn't stop until the lights above the pod flickered and died. Oliver gasped like a diver breaking the surface after too long underwater. I caught him before he fell. His eyes met mine for a second, clear, panicked, and I saw something deeper than fear. Recognition. Maybe from a poster. Maybe from a file. You're the sister, he rasped. They said Marcus. Never broke. I didn't ask who they were. I already knew. We got out before the alarms caught us. I carried him half the way, adrenaline and fury the only things keeping my knees from folding. Back in the woods, under the weight of stars, too silent to care, I knew 2 things. Marcus was alive, and Stonebridge was building a machine from the bones of its own people. No more hiding. No more waiting for someone to believe me. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to tear Project Lyra apart from the inside out. The tower loomed like it always had spine-straight red brick, and proud of itself. The oldest structure in Stonebridge. It used to ring every Sunday morning like it had something to say. Now it was silent. No chimes. No time. Just secrets. The transmission was set to go live at 200 a.m. A 5G burst masked as a regional systems update. It would carry the final version of Lyra's neural sync protocol to 5 partner locations across the country. 1 pulse. 1 signal. Then nothing would be the same again. I reached the top of the tower at 1:47. The door wasn't locked. Inside cables fed into server racks stacked like bones. The old bell mechanism had been gutted and replaced by a cylindrical pulse transmitter suspended from steel brackets. It vibrated faintly alive in a way no machine should be. And then I saw her. Mayor Eliza Harrow. Flawless suit. Silk gloves. The kind of smile that doesn't move the eyes. She stood next to the control console, fingers grazing the switch like it was ceremonial. "You should have stayed gone, Evelyn," she said softly. "You always had a habit of ruining progress." "I think your definition of progress needs work," I answered, stepping into the light. Her lips curved upward. "We're giving people relief. You know how heavy memory is, pain, guilt. Shame all gone. We're building clarity, purpose, peace. You're deleting people. They don't feel it. That's the point." Behind her, someone shifted. I froze. A figure stepped from the shadows. Broad-shouldered, measured gait. Surgical precision in every movement. And then he spoke. "You shouldn't be here." I turned. My lungs stopped. It wasn't the voice. It was the way he stood. The tilt of his head. The scar behind his right ear that only 3 people knew about. Marcus. My brother. Alive. Changed. He wore a uniform, not military. Not civilian. Something designed. Sleek. Black. No nameplate. Just a single badge, Lyra Corps Director. I couldn't speak. Not at first. "You died," I finally whispered. 8 years ago. They said, "I buried you." "No," he said flatly. "You left me behind." Something in my chest cracked. I searched. "You gave up." "No, Marcus. They told me it was unrecoverable. The wreckage, your blood type." False leads, he cut in. "Deliberate. They didn't want you finding out I was the one who volunteered." I blinked. "You what?" "I built the first prototype. Helped test memory transfer. I let them copy me, Evelyn. And when I hesitated when I tried to pull out, they rewrote the rest." Silence. Eliza smiled from this console, watching us like she was observing a controlled reaction. "He was the perfect base," she said. "Analytical, detached, morally flexible." But deep down, her eyes flicked to me. "Still your brother. That's why we kept him." I took a step forward. "Marcus, you know this isn't right. Look at me. This isn't what Dad wanted. It isn't what you wanted." He didn't answer. Just stared. Then a twitch. Barely there. A flicker in his right hand. 2 fingers tapped his thigh once, then twice. The old signal. Our signal. I remember. I couldn't breathe. "Eliza," he said suddenly. "Initiating countdown." She turned to him. "Already? Protocol requires authorization timing. We're at T-minus 13 minutes. I saw the second of hesitation in her. Then she nodded and moved toward the side control panel. And that's when Marcus looked at me. Not cold, not blank, but afraid. He mouthed something. Just 3 words. "You have to." I stepped toward the core. The pulse generator was already humming higher the pre-sync phase. Once it hit full capacity, any disruption would either fail or fry the entire system. And with it, Marcus, his memories, his consciousness. Whatever pieces of him hadn't been overwritten would die in the heat of the disruption. "You're not serious," Eliza said sharply. "You'd kill your own brother. He's already gone," I said, voice breaking but steady. "You killed him years ago." I reached for the disruptor device in my coat, a small cylindrical charge, timed to sync with pulse oscillations. No gunfire, no mess. Just blackout. "Don't," she warned. Marcus stared at me. One nod. One breath, and I set the device. As the light flared red and warning alarms screamed through the tower, Eliza lunged. But Marcus was faster. He blocked her, held her back, looked me in the eye one last time, and said, "Make it mean something." I pulled the trigger. White. Heat. Silence. The silence after the pulse hit was unnatural. Not empty, just wrong. Like the tower itself was holding its breath. Sparks hissed from the base of the transmitter, and the room filled with that sharp metallic stench of burning circuits. The disruptor had worked. The sync chain collapsed mid-propagation, cutting Lyra's signal before it could leave Stonebridge. I staggered to the console. The system still pulsed weakly enough for one last command. I plugged in the flash drive. The virus was simple, elegant, It didn't just shut things down, it erased them. Bit by bit, it crawled through Lyra's archive, wiping every file, every memory thread, every coded shadow of a person who never consented to be split into data. I watched them go. The names, the numbers, Marcus's file, and then the screen flickered just once before blacking out completely. Behind me, Eliza Harrow lay on the floor, stunned, pinned by 2 agents who hadn't been in the tower a moment ago. Reed must have called them in. Federal, silent, efficient, no headlines, no noise, just containment. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. Of course she didn't. People like her don't bleed in public. They just fade from view until the next mask is ready. I turned back. Marcus was slumped near the base of the generator, unmoving, breathing barely. I dropped beside him, heart hammering so loud it drowned out the rest of the world. "Marcus," I said. "It's done. Lyra's gone. You're safe." For a moment, nothing. Then his lips parted. Dry. Slow. Barely a whisper. "Evie." No one called me that. Not since we were kids, sneaking out past curfew, daring each other to race bikes down Harper Hill with our eyes closed. He remembered. Some part of him buried beneath the rewrites, the compliance layers the synthetic commands had survived. Tears hit my cheeks before I felt them. I took his hand and held it like we were 10 again, and the world still made sense. Then his eyes fluttered closed. I didn't let go. Not yet. Because for the first time in years, he'd come back. Even if it cost us everything. I left before sunrise. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. Not out of bitterness, just instinct. The kind you grow when you've been burned too many times by people who swore they were on your side. Besides, there was nothing left for me to fix here. Only what could be remembered. The train out of Stonebridge was late as always. I waited in the shadows of the old station platform with a single bag and a sealed envelope marked for a contact at The Hague, a division that specializes in state-embedded AI warfare and covert data trials. They'll know what to do with Lyra's source code. They'll understand what it means when power forgets to ask permission. I didn't include my name, just the files. And a note. This began in one town. It won't end here. I sent one more letter, handwritten, no return address. To my mother. Inside, no explanation, no defense, no apology. Just a line I knew she'd understand. Memory can be erased. But truth never dies. And under it, a photo. Me and Marcus arms around each other on the front steps of the house we thought would last forever. He's laughing. I'm pretending to be brave. Neither of us knew then what would be taken, but I know now what I'm fighting for. As the train pulled away from Stonebridge, I watched the town fade behind the trees, its rooftops tucked under fog. The old bell tower still standing empty and silent. They'll rebuild. They always do. And maybe one day when they ask what really happened that night, when the signal died, and the mayor disappeared, and the fog finally started to lift, someone will remember. Maybe not my name. Maybe not even Marcus's. But they'll remember that someone stayed long enough to protect what everyone else forgot. And that's enough. Because I've learned something. Sometimes survival isn't about keeping your memories. It's about making damn sure the wrong people don't rewrite them. And that's the story I'll carry, even if no one else remembers it happened at all. What do you think about the above stories? If you were me, what would you do? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below.